All right, welcome back. My name's Anthony. This is Jim, and today we are going to continue our talk about the run-up to World War II. Last time we focused mostly on Germany and Russia, and today we're going to be focusing mostly on Italy and Japan and move into the United States.
Close with America, at
Yeah.
least up until FDR time.
Yeah.
But we're setting the stage, we're introducing the characters, so you have an idea. Because to me, this is a really exciting part about the build-up, because there's so much foreshadowing.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That you can see these conflicts coming years before, sometimes even full decade. I mean, obviously Germany you can't, because he didn't even take power to 33, but still, in Japan and the Far East, you know there's a big conflict coming between at least Japan and Great Britain.
It's a big pressure cooker for sure.
Yes.
Because of the interests that the British have in the Far East, especially in China.
And the Japanese want it.
Yes.
That's really what
That's where it comes down to. But today we are going to start off by looking at our most flamboyant of these characters of the pre-World War II era, and that of course is Benito Mussolini
and his greater Italy.
Yes. So what we focus here, and this map does give you somewhat of a representation of what's going on here. Pre-World War I, Italy is by all means a constitutional monarchy. They have a king, but they have a parliament that is helping to run that country.
Yeah, and it is a very strong monarchy. It's very similar to what Spain was after Franco. Mm-hmm. The monarchy has a lot of control, can dissolve parliament at will, pretty much. So you either cooperate with the monarchy or things fall apart, because the monarchy is the only steady thing in Italian politics, all the way back to Corsica or Sardinia, Piedmont, Savoy, who are the founding state of Italy. And you can see, though, with the map, they get a little bitty chunk in the north and a little bitty chunk on the Adriatic Sea.
Right.
And
that's pretty much it.
That's really it. I mean, they get Libya.
Yes, they do. Down here in the
can't really see there, but,
not yet. But we'll have a different map later on. The thing, though, of course, with taking it back to World War I, Italy was that flip-flop. They started on the Central Powers.
They were supposed to be a Central Power, yeah.
Right, they were a triple alliance country.
Yes.
And then when they, for a lack of better terms, when they saw the writing on the walls of the German and Austro-Hungarian Empire starting to kind of crumble a little bit at the beginning, they said, we're going to switch and we're going to the Allied side, and well, I guess the rest is history.
Well, and the interesting part about that is it does show a very big focus. Pre-World War I, their focus is very European.
Right.
They're not really worried about colonies or anything like that. They're worried about Italy.
Right.
What is Italy? And you know, kind of like the Germans in the idea that they want all ethnic Italians in their country. Because we see with Mussolini, his focus is outward, a greater Italy.
Yes. Yes.
And of course, you know, if you look at it, I'm not sure they made the best bet going with the Allies in World War I. Because I mean, look what they got. They basically got shafted at the table.
They did. They did.
And that's going to play a part in a lot of their instability after World War I. They're kind of, you know, we talked about Russia being the losing winner.
Right.
They're on the good side, but they lost the war.
Right.
And things got really out of control.
Correct.
Italy's kind of that same way. They won, but at what cost? I mean, you're starting to talk a man per acre kind of stuff here.
Yeah, right.
Way too many casualties for very little gain, economically, basically zero gain.
Right.
Which causes, of course, the government to become fairly unstable, and the socialists, who were really pretty strong in Italy before, gain a lot of power.
Right.
But unfortunately, they lost somebody on the way to the war. A little guy named, well, he's not a big guy. He's the Benny the Moose, if you want to go with the American slang for him.
Okay.
He's a socialist writer. He controls their newspaper.
That's a big
He's
deal,
an editor. So especially when you look at the history of socialist parties in Europe, being the editor of the newspaper basically means you're in charge of the party, or at least you're driving the party in a certain direction. And But the socialists come out against the war,
Mm-hmm.
and Mussolini doesn't bite. He becomes more and more critical until eventually they kick him to the curb.
Yeah.
So he does crazy stuff like go out and form his own political party.
With him being this uber nationalist.
Yes, he despite being a socialist by, I guess, upbringing, really almost.
Sure.
Upbringing, his family was kind of involved. But he definitely has a very nationalistic streak. He doesn't buy into the nationalism, or the anti-nationalism, really, the universalism of socialism. Marxist ideal is there are no countries, no borders.
Yes.
And therefore, his thought that Italy is important really starts to grate. And it wasn't important when they were talking about workers versus capitalists and and getting laws passed and labor rules. That wasn't really an issue because you were working in Italy.
Right.
But when you start looking on the international stage, suddenly there's a
big rift.
Yes, very big rift.
And from what all that I've honestly read and talked about with Mussolini is the fact that he was like the people's person.
Very, for a fascist, very populist.
Yes.
He made very popular decisions, but then again, economically, Italy is behind the curve.
Sure.
They don't have colonies, so they don't have that access to a lot of extra raw materials. Their country is very split in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Italy being very poor and agricultural.
Correct.
And the north being fairly wealthy and much more industrialized. I mean, that really started all the way back to the Renaissance.
Correct.
I mean,
places like Venice and
Milan
Genoa.
and Genoa,
all of these major
cities
in the north, right there near the Alps, or Tuscany area.
Yes, Tuscany.
Made it a huge profit of trade along the Silk Road and trade within the Adriatic, the Mediterranean, and they were shipbuilding and manufacturers, and maybe even similar to America in a way. Southern America, especially pre-Civil War, very poor, very agricultural, and then the North being industrialized and more of this
cosmopolitan.
There you go, great idea.
Yeah, good word there. So Mussolini leaves, and the stuff I read didn't really talk about him taking a lot of people with him. But in the public sphere, his ideas are, especially during the war, are much more popular. He's very patriotic.
Sure.
He's very pro-troops, I guess, if you want to put it in modern American parlance, support the troops. And then when the war ends, the fascist party, as we see with Hitler, becomes the bulwark for, I guess, the respectable classes of people against the socialist/communist threat.
The workers who are dirty, who are nasty, who want to overthrow everything that is Italian and make it a worldwide situation. I could see why Mussolini would be so against the socialists.
Oh, yeah. He's much more authoritarian than the socialists of Italy usually were.
Right.
They were already developed into working with the monarchy.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Long-term probably wouldn't have worked, but with the economic crisis after the war, it cost a lot of money, which left a lot of debt, a lot of dead.
Yeah.
For no real economic gain. Italy just felt like it got the shaft. At the Treaty of Versailles, they were hoping for a mandate over in the former Ottoman Empire in the area of Iraq. That got shut down by the British hard. Italy just got treated as a second fiddle.
Well, again, I don't see them really being any big player.
Well,
they did have
tied down a few divisions. That's about it.
Sure, they had some good success in the southern flank, but did they really do much?
13 battles in one spot, so I'm not sure they were making much. It was almost as bad as the Marne.
Yeah.
In France, but with mountains. So
right.
Yuck.
You're
not going to gain a lot of ground.
You're not, and you're not going to get much of this morale boost by fighting in the mountains. No thanks.
It's brutal, it's ugly, and it doesn't really help them. And so the Treaty of Versailles leaves Italy a winner with kind of a bad taste in their mouth.
Right.
And so, as things destabilize, Mussolini organizes his march, his black shirts,
Yes.
to march on Rome to demand control of the government, really. And the king, Vittorio Emanuele, makes him the prime minister. And that's in 1923. And then Mussolini proceeds to go by the fascist playbook, take control of the press. And then you start taking control. I mean, once you control the press, it's easy to control votes.
Sure.
But you start taking control of boardrooms. You start taking control of businesses, not directly like communism would say.
No.
But by controlling the top of the business, you own the business.
By putting your people in as like a CFO or...
Right. Or, you have a board of 12 people, 6 of them have to be fascists.
That's
And you blackmail 2 of the others.
correct.
I
So
mean,
that way you've got
because you have the press on your side.
Of course. And, now correct me if I'm wrong, the black shirts march on Rome was more of like a bloodless coup.
Yeah, really. I'm sure there was some violence, but it wasn't organized or this bloody, we're beating our way into Rome and killing everybody. It was literally, we're going to show our solidarity. It was on the anniversary of something, and I can't remember what it was now. But anyway, it was a very patriotic, we want to take Italy back.
Right.
And this is where he starts to put forth his idea. So by 1925, though, there are no other political parties except the fascists. And of course, the fascist comes from the fasci, which is the 3 strands which symbolize strength through unity. And that's what he really preaches over and over again. It's all about Italy being strong, but they have to be one. And if you disagree, we disappear you.
Sure.
Or we conveniently give you a scandal that you can't deal with and it runs you out of the political sphere. He was much more of a politician, really, than Hitler was.
Well, yeah, because again, Benito Mussolini is, he coins himself El Duce.
Yes,
The Duke.
Yes.
He is, and for a lack of better terms, he is a modern American politician. He beats his chest saying, I'm the guy who's going to help fix all of these problems, whereas Hitler was the one, we're going to put people in fear of us because, well, that's the only way we know how to fix things.
Yeah, Mussolini liked the velvet glove a little bit more, but the iron fist was definitely in there.
Don't get me wrong, that's true.
People getting jailed and offices burned or assassinated was not an unusual thing. But he goes about, by 1925, and that has always struck me as such an interesting thing. He is the father of fascism.
Yes.
He used the writings of another gentleman, I can't remember again. I'm such a bad name dropper with that kind of thing. But I don't just drop the names, I don't even remember them. But he built fascism really from the ground up as a political ideal. And his main focus, because he's in Italy, is restore Rome.
Yes, for sure.
He turns the focus outward. He moves away from Europe. He wants to get Italy into the colonial game, which is really, really late. When we talk about America and Japan being late to the colonial game,
we're talking like 1860s and 70s for the United States and Japan, not
1920s. He is so late to the game that the game is already over. Really.
Right, because honestly, you take it another 20 years down the road,
and it starts to go the other direction.
Exactly. You start to see a large number of those central and, most of your northern and southern African colonies starting to get their independence. Italy is so late. It's a wonder why they even did it, which of course
it comes to Mussolini.
Mussolini's the guy.
He was the cult of personality that he created. His style of speaking, to Americans, his style of speaking looks buffoonish, really.
Yeah,
he's over. He's got the chin thrust out all the time, the chest puffed up, but to Italians, that was their ideal of manhood, almost like a Spanish idea of machismo.
Yeah. Oh, yes. They've got a lot of machismo
and
there.
So he goes out to do it. He constantly is petitioning the League of Nations to give him Ethiopia. They just say no over and over again. And so finally he just has a war.
Right.
Where he uses chemical weapons. You know, he's bombing guys in airplanes who are running with spears. It's a really one-sided disaster for Ethiopia. The only black country had never been occupied, was not ever colonized.
That's
until
correct.
1936.
That's correct, yes.
And because they are upset about it, they withdraw from the League of Nations.
Which makes sense.
I mean, if you're going to be a fascist dictator who wants colonies, you're never going to get along.
No.
But this is the beginning of the end of the League of Nations, or maybe it's the end of the beginning. I'm not sure. It shows that they are too weak, and that the Allies, French and British especially, because they are the movers and shakers of the League of Nations, because we don't belong, Soviet Union doesn't belong.
No.
I mean,
there's really the only two, France and Great Britain, that are really the big names of the League of Nations. Yeah, you may have, I don't know.
I mean, Germany's like probably the next biggest, and they've emasculated it.
Exactly.
I mean, just taking everything away. So, but it definitely shows Hitler kind of a little glimpse that the League of Nations doesn't really got any clout.
No,
if you can box in Great Britain and France, nobody else is going to say anything. And so then the Spanish Civil War kicks off in 1936. Italy goes directly in supporting, I can't remember the name, before Franco.
Oh, yes.
But eventually Franco takes his place.
Yes.
The Nationalist Party.
Correct.
Which is a fascist party, just like them. But in Spain, a whole different circumstance, in the sense that the Republicans are wildly Marxist, anti-church, which, regardless of every other thing, causes them to lose quite a bit of support, because Spain is a very Catholic country.
They are.
And so the idea that you're going to attack the church and burn them down and kill priests,
that puts a lot of people away.
I think when it comes right down to it, if you looked in hindsight, the Republicans of Spain misplayed their hand. If they would have left a religion alone,
they could have easily won.
Probably would have beaten the Nationalists to death, because there wouldn't have been this big counter revolution, really.
Correct.
And so Italy and then Germany send support to the Nationalists. Soviet Union then supports the Republicans. A lot of American volunteers.
Correct.
What's his name?
Ernest Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway, writer.
Yes.
What ends up driving an ambulance there?
He does.
But we also hear some horror stories from the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Yes, unfortunately.
Where they start realizing that what they're fighting for is not what they signed on for. They heard the slogans of free Spain from the monarchy and the fascists and all this other stuff, but they failed to take into account that the people they're working for were really just the same, just on the other side of the political coin.
Right.
With communists. Deeply held Marxists.
And that's the thing, you know, the United States in our recent history, since 1945, has been so anti-communist, oppressive, anti-socialist, that in the 1920s and 30s we actually go and try and protect them. But it's just volunteers. It's not the government.
That's true.
It's not the government. That's true. It is just volunteers.
Who feel like they're fighting for freedom. But by 39, I don't know that there's a whole lot of Americans left.
Probably not.
Casualties were high because it was a bloody, nasty war.
It was, and you have guerrilla warfare.
Well, but you also have the first real modern use of air power, also armored battles. I mean, the Germans and the Italians get their money's worth with what they sent.
That's
true.
The
Germans with the Condor Legion with their aircraft.
And, right.
They definitely get their money's worth, and they get a nationalist Spain, which is exciting for them. This all the way to 1939, but that's an ally as far as they're concerned. Politically, Franco is on their team, but Franco's not an idiot.
No.
So we're not going to talk about Spain.
We're going to put a pause on Spain right now, table that for next.
But I mean, Spain just doesn't play.
You're right, they don't.
It's probably one of the bigger disappointments that Mussolini would have, if nothing else, because he would have been a great stop. I mean, if they could have based aircraft in Spain, the Straits of Gibraltar would have been closed.
Yes.
Which means everything to fight in Egypt would have to go all the way around Africa.
You would have had...
it looks in 1939 almost like checkmate.
True.
As long as you ignore the fact that the piece you're moving has free will.
Yes.
And decides it can't afford a war,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going to fight France in a land war,
Yeah.
and says we're out.
Mm-hmm.
And they become a neutral country for the entire war.
True.
So we've taken care of Spain.
Yeah. Awesome.
Then, of course, Spanish Civil War, they keep demanding territory in Africa. His desire is to have a stretch going from Libya to Ethiopia continuously. Well, guess what? Sudan is in there. Egypt is in there.
Right.
Great Britain never is going to go for that.
No, and it was very reluctant that the Italians were even able to take even a portion of Egypt in the early.
Oh, yeah, in the
Yeah.
very beginning of the war. But
again, that's putting it a little. I'm
Jumping ahead
of myself. but again, the idea of Italy taking over and restoring a Rome that was of Caesar Augustus's time.
yes, that we'd have the Mediterranean would become an Italian lake.
It's not
Gonna
going
happen.
to happen. You've got France and Tunisia, France and Algeria. You have
Britain and Egypt.
Britain and Egypt. You have Spain in Morocco and northern Sahara.
Yes.
It is not going to be any possibility there.
But Mussolini's selling dreams.
Yeah, you can sell a lot of dreams, but
Well,
you know,
and he did. I mean, the people
they
believed
got
it.
on.
In
They got
1939, or April of 1939, they invade Albania.
Mhm.
Again, a country that is not able to defend itself, even
Well,
against a second-rate power like
no.
Italy. Albania folds in about a month,
And so,
and so he gets another boost
yeah,
that he can show that he's restoring the empire.
it's like he's taking a green mushroom from Mario, you know, getting that extra life.
And we'll see later that his plans for Greece don't work out as well as he'd
No.
like. But I mean, that's Italy.
Right.
But because of the way the League of Nations, well, first the Treaty of Versailles, but then the League of Nations thwarted their desire for national recognition on the international stage, it kind of really means that Mussolini's going to be with Hitler, even though he really didn't think much of Hitler to begin with. Because remember, he is the father of fascism.
Right.
And so you have this little pretend fascist running around in Germany.
With his toothbrush mustache.
Yeah, with his toothbrush mustache, and it failed artist.
Uh-huh.
And then you have, Japan, another nation, and suddenly you have this axis of evil.
Oops. Too much.
Well, one more. Wait, because we're moving into Japan. I just
Yes.
kind of wanted to connect how we see these countries that are very disparate, different, have very different goals.
Right.
But Italy shares a lot of goals with Japan in the sense it wants to become a world power.
And here's the thing.
A great power.
And yes, exactly. Because Japan is, for most of their history, an isolationist state.
Oh, excessively isolationist.
For the first 300 to 500 years of their existence, let's back there. The first 300 years of their actual combined kingdom, they were very much, you leave the island, don't ever come back. We are not allowing you back in.
And we don't let foreigners in.
And we don't let foreigners in. It's not until the 1850s that the United States
kind of pushes their way
They
in.
push their way in with the Treaty of Tokugawa that ultimately gives the Americans
Trading rights.
specific,
To, like,
exclusive.
what, one place?
Correct. I think it was maybe 1 or 2 ports. But that was it. They couldn't go to the capital. They couldn't see the emperor. They couldn't do anything along those lines. But
They couldn't leave the harbor quarter.
no.
So, I mean, sailors aren't running around the town meeting girls.
No way, no way.
Unless the girls are going to meet them.
And that may be even more of an issue. But again, it puts Japan on a time limit.
Well, they realize real quickly that they're at 1850. They're way, way, way behind. Militarily, they're still running around with swords and basic, Ming Dynasty cannon.
Yes.
And Admiral Perry is cruising around in what looks like, Luke Skywalker's boat.
Exactly. And then, I mean, boy, it was an eye-opening experience for them, and they needed to expand.
And they're the only country that bootstrapped their own industrial revolution.
Yeah.
They just here they come. They decided they were going to be more advanced, and so they did it.
They definitely improved their militaristic style, their industrial style, their whole society really took hold and ran.
And in a kind of a strange twist of fate, whereas feudalism had pretty much died out everywhere else in the world, industrialism in Japan reinforced those stratifications where you're a serf or a factory worker. There's no difference as far as the people at the top are concerned.
Right.
They're interchangeable people. And it's we don't see any of the civil rights things, even in the countries like Italy and Germany. They at least gave mouth service or lip service to certain rights.
Sure.
But Japan, it's not even an issue. It wasn't even part of their culture to begin with.
No.
And so they create this military because, of course, they were run by shogunate.
Yeah.
So military is going to be their focus.
Yeah.
And we see they start becoming industrialized, or they become imperialist pretty quickly. 1895, they take Taiwan, which I think was owned by China nominally.
Yes.
And then, of course, we see up here, 1905 becomes a protectorate after they beat the Russians at the Straits of Tsushima.
Right.
Which is right there in between Korea and Japan. The Russians sailed all the way around the world, really, to just get sunk in a matter of hours. I mean, the Japanese had built a modern, professional navy.
Correct.
Quickly. Some that the Russians just didn't have. I mean, the Russians did a really good job against the fishing fleet next to England, but not good against people that shoot back.
Well, and here's the thing, after that battle in the Russo-Japanese War, and the fact that the Japanese are able to, for all intents and purposes, destroy the Russian fleet, everyone's like, whoa.
Leads to a Russian Revolution.
Exactly.
Well, a rebellion, I guess.
A rebellion, correct, that would ultimately bring more...
Well, it makes sure that communism is there to stay in Russia. Yes. Because their Soviets, their committees were able to be put into the military after that revolution. And, of course, the Duma becomes a thing. But coming back to Japan, we see they start having imperial ideals really as soon as they become as modern, when they see themselves as equal to Westerners.
Correct.
Which is, a good spot. But guess who doesn't see them as equals? Anybody
else.
Anybody in the West.
They did have a seat, I will say this, they did have a seat at the Treaty of Versailles, but Japan, of course, like anything else, was not given a lot.
Kind of like talking about Italy.
Right.
What did they do for the war?
Right. What are you going to give them?
I mean, they took some German islands out here.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, Palau. In 1914, and a couple farther south.
Right.
Including Truk, which will become important in the war later. Guadalcanal.
Right. Beyond
and they have a couple ports in China because the Germans had got those during the Boxer Rebellion.
That's true. That is true.
But which gives them that
toehold. The toehold.
The toehold. Yeah, really, and it's just toeholds. I mean, Germany didn't have an expansive territory.
No, it was nothing like what what the British had, and nothing like what the French had in French Indochina, or anything along those lines that was a good, immersive amount of land
territory. It was trading ports.
Yes, exactly. They were just trying to get their products in so that we can get more money out. The Japanese, on the other hand, again, they're the ones who want to expand. They have to expand.
Well, they can't do anything else because economically they are the worst off of all the world powers, including Italy.
Exactly.
Because they have no real natural resources.
They do not.
100% of their aluminum is imported. 85% of their iron ore, 79% of their oil.
And most of that oil is coming from
America and the Dutch.
Yes. Dutch East Indies
and the
United States. And again, this is why you can even see it right there. Japan being that archipelago or group of islands, they're volcanic islands. You may have some good soil, but that's it.
Yeah, you don't get a whole lot of mining in volcanic islands.
No.
And so they just don't.
They have to go.
They're going to either become great trading people.
Yes.
1980s.
Correct.
We see that. But
yeah,
at this time, if you're going to be an industrial power, you need cheap resources.
Correct.
Which means you own them.
Yes.
That's the only way you're going to get them cheap enough.
Right.
And they just, I don't know. When you look at it, they're just, in 1920, the 1920s, they just don't have much going on.
No, they're improving. They are improving militaristically and economically, but not like what you would assume of a great power.
Right.
Which again,
they are without a doubt a second-rate power.
correct. Sure. Yes. I
Not
agree.
something they would appreciate to
No.
be told to them, but when you look at the economics, when you look at the military, even the military size of their fleet, when you start figuring in, because they're so resource poor, they don't build new ships like we see Great Britain, Germany, and America doing.
Correct.
They build ships and they keep them, they update them over and over again, but they don't just build a brand new cruiser. They keep that cruiser until basically it falls apart.
Right.
But the peace movement, I thought this would be a good place to talk about that movement that really fascinated Europe especially. How do we outlaw war?
Gosh.
We have to make war. That last one was just too much.
So many dead.
Kellogg-Briand Treaty
Yes.
is the idea that we're going to outlaw war.
Okay.
Lasted about a minute and a half, I think.
Yeah,
before the
I think
first war
so.
was declared, but it's this utopian ideal that grips France and Great Britain predominantly.
Sure.
They're the drivers to these treaties. That they literally have a treaty that outlaws the use of force to take something from other people. Doesn't outlaw it for defense or to maintain control of your colonies, amazingly enough.
Well, of course, why would you want to do that? I mean, if there's a rebellion down in southern Africa, you better be sure Britain's down there taking care of it.
At this time still, Japan is run by a civilian government. Yes, it is very militaristic, but
Yes.
it is a civilian government under the emperor.
Right.
But the emperor is a figurehead.
Yes.
He has some very vague veto powers, and he can kind of direct, but it's never like go and do.
Right. It's never full blown.
I would like, and well, you can do with what you want with that.
Yes.
But the real killer is the Naval Treaty of 1930.
Yeah.
Which sets the number of battleships. We're going to limit the number of battleships because I guess battleships cause wars.
Yeah, because that's what causes the wars.
But yes. Having too many battleships make people have wars. I guess you can't really disprove the theory.
That's true, but I think their aim was a little off on that one.
But this gave them a great chance to really insult the heck out of the Japanese. The Japanese wanted to be considered a great power in the East.
True.
America was given a pretty large number because they had two oceans.
Yes.
Great Britain, of course, because they're the ones making the rules,
Yeah.
had a pretty large Navy allowance. France just kind of kept what they had because, yes, they had a large empire, but they just weren't as naval focused as the British.
Right.
But they did have French Indochina.
They did.
And they had colonies in Africa.
They did.
But most of their colonies were focused fairly close to home.
Right.
They didn't need these big overarching fleets like the British did, or like the Americans by this point, who owned the Philippines
Who
and
have
Guam,
strong- yeah.
and these islands in the middle of the Pacific and the Caribbean.
Right. They have a lot of area to cover.
Right. So a large navy makes sense, but
Right.
Japan wanted to be considered in that first tier. And the great powers basically said, nope, you have to sit at the kiddie table for battleships. Which, of course, leads them to build aircraft carriers. Because they have these big ships that they can't turn into battleships. So they convert large cruisers, battle cruisers into carriers because then they don't count against their number. Because nobody cares about aircraft carriers yet.
Because it's not a destroyer, it's not a battleship.
Right, it's not a battleship. But 1931 comes, and the army in Kwangtung, which is basically the southern portion of Manchuria there, where the little tongue thing dips down into the Yellow Sea, decides to take Manchuria. Not the government, not the emperor. The commander of the army in Kwangtung decides, I'm going to invade Manchuria.
Why not?
So they do.
Yeah.
And they conquer it fairly quickly.
Well, when you're going up against a group of people who are, well, again, for the longest of times having
Centuries behind.
yes, they are.
Militarily.
China again is not what we think of it today.
No.
They are not what they think. We are seeing people who are still living in huts, using wooden tools.
We need to think poor agricultural with just a thin layer of industry on the very top.
Right.
And not good industry, just basic industry.
And it's mostly along the coastlines.
Well, yeah, the inside of China is a dead zone for a large chunks of it. Tibet is not very habitable.
No.
The area above that is the Gobi Desert.
You're not seeing anything in there.
And the mountains all in the east, it's like 30-some% of land in China is arable, which means usable for crops. And so that huge population in a small area, and of course because of the mountains and the lack of transportation,
right,
it's very difficult for a central government to get anything done because if you're a warlord with enough people,
you're
say
owning
no.
that area.
You own it. So the League of Nations gets upset with them, and so they leave the League of Nations. So now we have two out.
Yep.
Of
Italy.
of the major powers, not great powers, but major powers have left because they're being thwarted in their imperialist plans.
Yes.
The civilian government in Japan says, we're going to try to negotiate with the Chinese and try to give it back. Well, that leads to them end up resigning because the army is like, no, I don't think so.
We need these resources.
We need these resources because Manchuria is rich in iron and coal.
Very rich. And again, you want to continue to be this empire, you're going to have the resources to protect your empire.
32, the prime minister gets assassinated. That's the end of civilian government until 1946.
Yeah.
The military basically takes charge. They still, the form of government, the guys in charge are still prime ministers.
Right.
Even though they wear uniforms with stars on them.
Correct. And them having this understanding of, I run the military and I run the government.
Yes, and the government exists, the country exists to fund the military because the military exists to make the country strong.
Yes.
It's a very circular logic.
But it works.
But it works to create a very large military, a very powerful military, which, well, you know, foreshadowing wise, we don't see the vast majority of that military strength because it's occupied in China.
Right.
Which they invaded in 37.
Right. With
the final real push is to take China and establish themselves. No one in the West can ignore us if we own China.
God.
Which I would agree.
I would definitely understand that if I read in my newspaper that Japanese forces are taking China, I'd be crapping my pants.
And this horribly distorted, kind of like National Socialism is a distorted fascist view.
Yes.
And all these views distort nationalism to create the nation as the most important thing in human life, is your nation. They're very undisciplined as a military. They see anybody who isn't Japanese as less than. So we have very much, just like the Germans have. So when they go crashing into China, we have the rape of Nanking.
Oh my gosh, it was
the
terrible.
number of reports of mass murder and mass rape are just, it's just...
The atrocities that the Chinese had to suffer by the hands of the Japanese.
Which the Koreans had already been suffering.
Correct. The Korean Peninsula, of course, being under the rule of Japan off and on for a century or two, officially be taking over in 1905 and then 1910 officially annexed, but you know, not until 1937 do you see the Japanese coming into Manchuria and officially taking much of that northern province, but they are just obliterating people left and right.
Again, the Chinese are
they're different.
They're fielding an 1890s army against a 1920s army.
Correct.
And you know, with the rapid change of technology, it's just a nightmare. Not to mention the corruption in the Republic government is out of control.
It is. It is.
It is just the political party in charge, the Kuomintang, are just a mess.
Right.
Sun Yat-sen is kind of the father of that, and we see Chiang Kai-shek coming to power.
Yes.
A Methodist, by the way, which is one of those weird things you just don't really understand what's going on there.
Well, you know, you see a lot of Catholics here in French Indochina, but we'll see there. But
you know, just the idea that a ruler of China was a Methodist, not Buddhist or Confucius or
Sure.
something like that.
Well,
kind of one of those mind-boggling
yeah.
ideas. But his government is so corrupt
it is.
and so based on those local warlords
Yes.
that it's almost paralyzed at times.
Well, and again, you're fighting against a group of people who are A, militaristic, and B, out for blood.
They want to conquer your country. It's an imperative of their entire national identity.
Yes.
Is to own you.
Yes.
And then we see things like the Flying Tigers. Claire Chennault takes the American Volunteer Group, shows up. Really provides the only real air force that the Chinese have.
Unfortunately.
The rest of it's supplied by the Soviet Union. About a couple squadrons of fighters that they provide. But nobody really gets that gung-ho about helping China, despite the fact that you could really say World War II begins in August of 1937.
Right.
Because of the invasion, Japanese invasion,
Right.
a major power invading another
Yes.
after the war is
Yes.
considered one of the major powers.
Right.
You know,
It was a huge event.
oh,
It was national, international headline news of what was going on. People continuously will regard the rape of Nanking as a huge turning point.
well, it definitely is a huge turning point in public relations in the United States.
Yes.
There's an outcry, not a very large outcry, but a vocal outcry to declare war on China
And avenge.
or Japan,
And
to
avenge
avenge
those
Nanking.
those individuals who had
because
died.
it's such an important part of their life. Cooler heads prevail, but
Yes.
it really puts in the American public's eye that Japan isn't the friendly, smiling Easterners that they try to portray themselves as from that point on. So
That's
for the next
true.
4 years, relations are strained.
Correct.
But Japan kicks off. I mean, some people will actually date World War I back to 31 with the invasion of Manchuria, but most people are like, that's a colony versus, it's kind of
That's a little ticky tack.
Yeah, but this one, it's hard to say that the war didn't start then because all these people, I mean, Japan is fighting in China, two major powers, or they're considered major powers. The United States and the Soviet Union are supplying arms and volunteers to
That
the
is
Chinese.
technically how a lot of wars of the world start.
Yes, we probably won't say Ukraine out loud too much when we say that.
Right.
Yes,
Right. But shifting gears a little bit.
But America is now back on the stage, I guess, because after the war, they go back to being America that they imagine America.
Yeah.
An isolationist country that's ready to sell anything to anybody.
Oh my gosh, we do it. We are we're the bankers and the suppliers for the world.
We are very quickly, I'm not sure because I haven't seen the tonnage totals, but we are very quickly moving to eclipse Great Britain as the ruler of the seas.
Correct.
Especially when it comes to trade.
Yes.
We're building boats like crazy.
Right.
We have this big navy.
Well,
We're immune to war. And so we use that immunity to enforce our Monroe Doctrine in Caribbean and Central America.
Right.
In Cuba and Nicaragua.
Dollar diplomacy is huge during this
huge.
or the interwar period because, again, the United States doesn't want to get into a major war, but we don't want to stop it from happening either because that's our moneymaker.
Well, our colonialism ideals haven't died.
No.
Despite the Moro Rebellion going on for 20-some years in the Philippines.
Right.
The fact that we discover pretty quickly as a republic, we're not very good at it.
Well,
we're not good at being imperialists. we don't make good conquerors because our natural instinct, our upbringing is, we the people.
Right. We don't want a colony.
These truths be self-evident.
Right.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when we can't, it's really hard to see ourselves holding down Filipinos or Cubans, or it doesn't really work well in popular thing. It gets done because the money greases the wheel.
Yes.
The dollar diplomacy.
Right.
But it's not really our And those things don't really stay in the headlines. They're not just, we don't see huge demonstrations
No.
to protest the invasion of Nicaragua.
No, you don't. You don't.
Just-
Because again, people see the money. They see the progress. They see how America is becoming more of this world power. So they're like, okay, we're gonna close our mouths, we're gonna close our eyes and close our ears to what's going on, and that's just
We
the
have
way it
cheap
is.
fruit?
Yeah, we do.
Well, then
Who
we
the
really
heck
like
wouldn't
it.
want some cheap bananas in the middle of the winter, or mangoes, or whatever the case may be? But what really does make headline news is, of course, the progressive era.
Right, it's been going full steam since the 1870s.
That is true.
I mean, they've been passing amendments to change the senators to be popular.
That's true.
Income tax,
Income
which was
tax.
just an idea that was over the top.
You had seen an income tax a little bit in the Civil War,
Right.
but that was just a
Emergency kind of
correct. It was not something that was supposed to stick for longer than the duration of the war. And it comes to a reason why. You know, people don't like taxes. You know,
thing. Right. But I mean, we're looking at an income tax that's charging what? 1% on the
Right.
top 10% of earners?
Right.
Nobody gets real feisty about that kind of tax.
Oh,
Even the
no,
rich
no, no.
didn't go around dodging taxes because 1%.
Ah, shoot, that's nothing.
Lose that in my couch cushions.
Yep, that's chump change to them. But other things that we do get to see with this progressive era, of course, is the women's suffrage movement. And that's taking place right there at the end of World War I.
Well, I mean, it's been going on for a while.
Correct.
But
the,
it's
the
really
fruition.
because of not as much as we see in World War II,
Right.
but women go to work more during the war.
They do.
They cover the men's jobs when they're gone to war.
Mhm.
Because we put, what, 2 million men in France?
Mhm.
So that's a lot of empty spots.
There are a lot of workbenches that need to be filled.
Right, especially in ammunition plants where we get the yellow women who they get poisoned by the
Yes, the radium girls.
Well, it's
right,
the
that's
chemical
right.
in artillery shells
Right.
that leaches in and messes with the liver.
Right.
It doesn't seem to cause much in the way of long-term effects,
But it does.
other than possible sterility,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously is not a big effect because we see the Roaring '20s go. People weren't slowing down on much of anything.
No, scootily pooping was definitely on the rise. But we also will see kind of an end of the progressive era by this time of the 1920s.
It reaches its high tide with the passage of, is it the 19th Amendment? 18th Amendment
Mhm.
with, I always get 18th and 19 mixed up, because I always think that women get the right to vote before, and it's
Nope.
not true. But
Nope, unfortunately not.
But Prohibition gets passed, which creates a huge demand for alcohol.
Of course, yeah, because you banned something
You
that
ban
people
something
really
that
like.
people like.
Hmm.
But in the upper level politics, we see conservatism really taking
Oh my
hold.
gosh, yes. We've had 8 years of a Democratic
And you can,
president.
Well, I mean, I guess Taft was he was a Republican.
He was,
But I mean,
he
when you
wasn't.
see Teddy Roosevelt before that,
Mhm.
he's a Republican / bull moose, but he's not a Democrat.
No.
So, but he's not a Republican, I guess, and that's what I'm trying to say. He's definitely more populist and very progressive.
Yes,
And so, really, we've seen almost 16 years
that's true.
of, I guess, for the times, liberal.
Good
presidents.
Put it. Good way to put it. Because again, you do have Teddy Roosevelt for his
time.
His time.
He's pretty
Right.
liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got then William Howard Taft, who is a successor to Roosevelt. He was handpicked by TR to take over as president. Did he do what he wanted? Not necessarily, but again, politics is different than what it is today. Presidents were not ones that were getting their hands into the mold and the mash of everything that's going on in Congress. They were separated for a reason.
They still really saw the separation of powers was incredibly important in the ideals of even the politics.
Correct.
I mean, even a Woodrow Wilson didn't go very far in
No.
pushing Congress. He allowed Congress to do, I mean, yes, he asked them to do things, but they were really the ones that formulated a lot of these plans.
Right.
I mean, they might have, picked up the phone and listened,
Sure, but
it was still, Congress was passing laws.
Correct.
He was approving them, and
Mhm.
everything was going forward from there.
yes, and of course, when case in point, 14 points. You know,
Oh,
at the
yeah.
end of World War I, Wilson proposes the 14 points, abolishing war and making freedom of the seas. What does Congress do?
No.
Nope, we're done.
We're not doing the Treaty of Versailles. We're not doing a whole lot of stuff you want.
Yes,
We're not joining the League of Nations, which
Oh,
I
by-
think was probably the biggest kick in the pants.
right.
I mean, that's kind of it's almost like Roosevelt / Truman's United Nations.
Yes.
And Congress just shoots it down.
Mm-hmm.
Because Congress, more, I guess, in a lot of ways, more reflecting the will of the people,
Yes.
says we're an isolationist country.
Correct.
We don't want to be involved in solving the rest of the world's problems.
Of course.
So conservatives win the day.
Yes. By 1921, well, even before that, you start to see Wilson's popularity go way down.
Well, yeah, the 1920 election,
He is out of it.
we see was Warren Harding's the first of the three, right?
Yes, Warren
Harding
Harding.
wins in 1920,
Mm-hmm.
pretty handily.
Yeah.
And then in his theory, kind of like Calvin Coolidge, I mean, the business of America is business.
Yes, exactly.
Let's make some money, and let's have a good time. The Roaring Twenties kick off because, well, we got all this money coming in as France and Britain pay off loans.
Mm-hmm.
Economically, we just got a bunch of money in our pockets. And
Well-
again, like I mentioned in another one, you know, even out here in the middle of nowhere, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that money that had gone through factories and through, you know, checks that guys earned while they were in France
Yep.
came back home and built churches and libraries and schools.
Yes,
and
of
just,
course.
the economy was booming.
You're right. You're right. You see it a lot in the farms. You see it a lot in the mill work. You see it everywhere. Again, you had
Mhm.
prices that were ultimately putting they had a basement price on a lot of your wheat produced in the 1918, 1919 in the Midwest part of the United States to help feed the war. And of
Mhm.
course, after with Herbert Hoover's Feed Belgium program.
Right. He's
You
not
know,
president yet.
He's not president, but he is a part of the cabinet of Harding that will help to feed.
Well, he was
those
also
starving.
appointed by Wilson.
Right, that's
Despite
correct.
the fact that he's a Republican.
Correct.
He's appointed to several different boards.
War Industries Board.
War Industries Board.
Mhm.
And Wilson is the last time we see a true bipartisan
Correct. Yes.
cabinet of any sort in
Right.
America. We don't see that in World War II. And
No.
of course, none of the other wars are really big enough to justify it. But
No.
it's a very different time. Despite the presidency is a battle of elites.
Correct.
Congress is where we get down and dirty, and we got Bubba that I know over the hill is my congressman.
Yep.
But the president is somebody who's been Woodrow Wilson's a university professor. How many people in the regular streets know him?
Nope.
Nobody. He knows people in the party,
Yes.
and that's fine.
But the other people, Harding, industry leader.
Mm-hmm.
Coolidge, again, industry leader.
Hoover,
Hoover.
just generally popular guy,
Yes.
and majorly wealthy, makes Donald Trump look like a nobody.
He made his wealth in mining, which is perfect for the time.
Yes.
I mean, gosh, the guy was a self-made millionaire.
Well, in today's money, billionaire.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
He's worth so much money, and but he's popular because he's done things like Feed Belgium.
Correct.
Everybody knows he's not a robber baron type.
No, he is more of that, again, the captain of industry, wanting to help people, wanting
Yes.
to be the friend of the population. But he's also the guy that says we're business oriented, we're the laissez-faire style, let us do what we do, and you don't question.
And they're the last of the caretaker presidents.
Correct.
These three guys are the last ones who see the president as just the leader of the executive branch, not the leader of the country.
Right.
The mover and shaker of everything that happens.
Right.
And we'll only see that happen again during Eisenhower, who is definitely a throwback.
Right, taking it back to the 19-teens, 20s
Yeah,
of,
he's
of
very
American
much
politics.
let things happen the way they
Correct.
happen. Congress's job is to do this stuff.
Yes,
And-
I'm not going to muddle myself with all of these nitty-gritty things.
And we've never seen that since.
Nope.
But anyway, I mean, 3 consecutive presidents, not consecutive terms for any of them. They
No.
all do 1 term and get out.
That's the surprising thing.
Well, I mean, who could take the pay cut?
No.
For these guys, that's a pay cut to be
You're
president.
right. You're right. Unfortunately, Harding does die while in office, which is it's sad for him.
Yeah.
Because he had a lot of outside of his office issues with his Ohio gang, but we're not gonna get muddled with that either. But
he's in charge when the first Red Scare begins.
oh my gosh,
we see
yes.
America reacting to stuff going on in the Soviet Union,
and we understand we don't want that here.
and so we see commies under every bed.
Exactly.
And because of the relation during the war, very similar to what we'll see in the 50s with the relationship we had in World War II.
Yes.
We see this fear that the Democrats, because of their relationship with Russia during the war, have allowed these commies to come in. Well, that doesn't make any sense because Russia was czarist during the war, but shh, don't tell anybody.
Right.
Facts don't need to be known.
No. So we have people such as A. Mitchell Palmer, who is the Attorney General of the United States, and he is the one that is ultimately the spearhead of this Red Scare, going after the union leaders, going after those who are suspected communists, going after major immigrant groups,
Yes.
Specifically Russian, Ukrainian, parts of even Italian immigrant groups that
yeah.
are wanting to get them out. Just send them back. The Soviet ark
Yes.
that was leaving the New York harbor in 1921 that was carrying over 400 suspected groups of Soviets. Were they really?
And
Who
the,
knows?
And the question, and to be honest, regardless of overreaction, there is an intertwining, especially in the early labor movement, with socialism.
Of course.
Because they have the same general goals.
Yes.
Workers of the world will unite. Well, let's
Yes.
unite to make sure we're getting good wages.
And better working conditions.
Better working conditions. And so you see a lot of socialists as part of labor unions.
Right.
Which, of course, just feeds that fire.
Yeah, it definitely fed
When
a lot of
Palmer
those
can
flames.
point to this guy and say, he's been a member of the Socialist Party since 1902, everybody goes, oh. They just kind of nod and agree. Because obviously, if he's been a member that long, he's got to be a bad guy.
Right.
Facts aren't a part, but it's a scare. It lasts what, 2 years, 3 years? Maybe?
Two to three at the most, because
basically
at
until
its-
Coolidge comes back.
Correct.
Comes into power.
Yes.
And he's like, he doesn't care.
it doesn't
he
really make
he
much of a
doesn't care enough to
difference.
push it.
No, because again, Coolidge is silent Cal Coolidge. A great anecdote that he had while he was president was he was at a state dinner, and a reporter comes up to him and says, "Mr. President, I've made a bet that you can't say 3 words this evening." And the guy is just flabbergasted when Coolidge actually responds to him and says, "You lose."
Yep.
And again, it's like, wow, this is the president of our nation. This is the guy who's the leader who, for all
A politician.
Yes.
And he doesn't say anything.
He doesn't say a word. Well, again,
Can we get a couple of those?
gosh, I wish we could. You know, the thing about it, though, Coolidge, unlike Harding, his predecessor, Coolidge was a backwater Vermont president.
But he was squeaky clean,
Yes.
which helped after Harding
for sure.
with the Ohio gang.
And of course, you know, even his father, a Methodist preacher, swore him in,
Yeah.
which is so weird to think that the vice president, not even in Washington at the time, goes to become president at a heartbeat, literally,
Yeah.
and moves on with the presidency.
Has his own, for the times, a successful presidency.
Yes.
Not rocked by scandal. The
No.
economy's booming.
Oh yes, he is in the wonderful soup bowl of the president.
He's got like this giant bucket and it's raining soup.
Yes.
And he's just
lapping it up.
He's lapping it up. And then 28 comes. He chooses not to run
Yes, he does. He didn't really want
because
to.
we don't have the 25th Amendment yet.
No, we don't.
So he is honoring what he sees as tradition.
Yes.
He's already served part of Hoover's, and he's done.
Yeah, he doesn't want to get into. He doesn't want to stay in it.
Well, it would cause a split.
It would.
In the party alone.
It would.
If he chose to go for what he would consider a third term.
Yes.
But, looking back at it, even with 25th Amendment, the amount of time he served wouldn't have counted against him. But either way, we get Herbert Hoover. That popular guy is now the third Republican president in a row. The economy is still looking sweet.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting plenty of alcohol, despite the fact that it's illegal.
Uh-huh.
Elliot Ness is, famous. Who cares?
Well, yeah, he's banging up a lot of speakeasies. He's making a lot of ruckus in Chicago and in New York and in parts of Kansas City, but nobody really cares.
It's an interesting time because we see especially the people of the time, probably Coolidge's dad.
Yeah.
Railing against the loose morals of these flappers.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Interestingly enough, yes, the premarital part of the relations were going crazy, but if the woman got pregnant, they got married, settled down, and had a normal life.
Yeah.
It was a phase of life to be in the flappers or in this wild roaring 20s moment. Most other people weren't involved in it. It was a niche part of the economy of the populace.
The cities.
Yes,
the cities are the ones where most
cities.
of your flappers lived. You live out in...
What would you flap? Your linens?
Yes.
But I mean, there's nowhere to go. There's no speakeasies.
Right. Yeah. You live out in Dearborn or Camden Point.
Yeah.
You're not going
down
anywhere. Where you may go down to the town hall to have a shindig, but
like my wife's grandparents met at a barn dance where
the
moonshine was flowing.
No, you didn't really care so much about the moonshine because, well,
they were girls there.
Yeah.
And the girls were excited. There were guys there.
Yeah.
But it was just a different era. It very much went along with what the French were going through in their 20s. Very libertine, especially when you compare it to pre-war.
Correct.
People have had enough of death and fighting, and they're going to live it up.
Right.
And so they do. But underneath it is there's still this constructed moral idea of what the family looks like. So you don't see a lot of radical change to the fabric of America. You just have this cool roaring 20s.
Yes.
But then the wheels come off.
Oh my gosh, it does. By October of 1929, you start to see the end.
Yeah. I mean, with the stock market crash 29, with the defaulting on loans and the margin calls, and everything just falls apart for Hoover.
Right.
And so next time we're going to pick up the story with FDR. Well,
yes.
With the end of Hoover's reign, he's almost a lame duck.
Yeah.
In the first year of his presidency.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't take off until March of 29.
Correct.
By October, the world
is
done. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to George W. Bush.
Right.
He's elected as this domestic president, going to solve all these problems in January. By September, we're at war.
Yes.
It's just a complete turnaround. And for Hoover, he's hamstrung in a lot of ways by his own political theory.
Correct.
So, but that's where we'll stop. We've got you at least America up to 1929. There are sluggards right now. We're farthest behind. So next time we'll start with them and move forward with them in Germany most likely, because Germany's also fairly far behind everybody else.
So please make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share it to your friends and family, and again, be sure to join us for next time.
Yes, and again, questions, comments, put them out there. I know we have low production values, but
we do what we can.
We do what we can, and if you have questions, we covered a lot of turf.
Yes,
3 major countries
we did.
And a whole lot of others, just kind of touching on them.
Yes.
So there's a lot of information coming out there. If you have questions, put it out there. We love to look up stuff.
For sure. Take care.
Take care.